Next, I'd like to welcome to the stage Karthik Krishnan, a longtime Thoughtworker, about 10 years here, and he has been our lead technologist on one of our largest clients in the world for quite a while now. Today is a real privilege to introduce Karthik because this month he is releasing a book that he has co-authored with a colleague around domain-driven design, and that is the content of this talk as well. Obviously, one of the perennially important topics in software engineering. What I really appreciate about what Karthik will talk to us about today is exploring an underappreciated corner in the context of functions as a service and serverless technologies in general and how DDD applies. So Karthik, welcome to the stage.
Thank you. Thank you, Brandon. Welcome, everyone. Hope all of you are having a wonderful conference today. Like Brandon mentioned, today's talk is going to be of two very popular topics. One that is domain-driven design and serverless. I was watching this talk from DDD Europe by one person called Gochko Adsik. He's a founder of MindMap, and he was talking about this subject, and it really inspired me. And today's talk is all about sharing some of those key excerpts from that particular presentation. And I would encourage you to actually check out his full talk. Sometime I have given the link as part of the presentation. All right, what are the key takeaways that I would like to have at the end of this talk for all of you is from a strategic design perspective, how does this whole serverless thing changes for us to be able to look at functions instead of applications, right? At the same time, what is our definition of what is a core when we talk about DDD, and what are our context boundaries, and how does that change when you put the serverless lens in front of it, right? Similarly, from a tactical design perspective, how do I start looking at building my aggregates, right? What should the aggregate design look like? How do I structure my domain events, right? What kind of state should it carry, and things like that. More importantly, talking about integration as a first-class citizen when you bring serverless into the context. Now, this is 2022. I'm not going to be standing here explaining what serverless is and what serverless is not, but it's very evident that the trend is only going upwards, right? Serverless has taken a lot of traction, a lot of adoption. You're seeing more and more cloud providers starting to provide capabilities, not just at the level of infrastructure, right? They're starting to provide capabilities, offering their foundational capabilities to be able to customize and be able to use in your day-to-day products, right? Then, this, for example, I'll take an example from Amazon Cognito. This is a user management system. You have so much of customizations that you can do rather than having to build something from the scratch. The other thing that we are also seeing is the next level solution providers who offer SaaS products on the cloud. They start offering customization so that you don't have to build things from the scratch. At the same time, you don't have to take whatever they offer as is, be able to customize and just build on top and offer the business value that you want to really get out of it. You're seeing a lot of low-code development environments coming up as well. Put up an example from Shopify, which is an e-commerce SaaS platform. Pretty much people who wanted to be able to build their e-commerce could get away by customizing some bits of it and get what they want for their particular business, right? So what I wanted to kind of emphasize here is serverless is not only becoming an execution mechanism, but more of an integration mechanism when you think about building solutions for your business. Kind of going back and just touching upon the tenets of domain-driven design, right? One of the key aspects of DDD is about identifying what is your core and focusing on that core of your business, right? What is your real differentiation in the business, in the product that you're building? Not to say that the other peripheral systems are not important. They are either supporting, they are generic in the sense that you could partner with someone. You could just buy a commoditized software and build the solution, right? Now, as Eric Evans puts it, the core is supposed to be delivering 20% of your business value, but be just about 5% of your code base, right? And it takes about 80% of your effort. So the point that I want to make here is you got to focus on what is your core. And if you're able to get the most bang for the buck with something like a serverless, you got to take it. Okay. Now, I want to take an example of an electronic medical record system, right? So imagine an EMR system being built for a clinic chain. Now, they identified patient records management supposed to be their core because they want to be able to bring in a lot of innovation as part of it. That does not mean they do not have other systems like scheduling, lab, identity management, so on and so forth, right? Now, just double clicking on that, if they are building a patient onboarding functionality, for example, now I just drew out a simple flow chart here, processing an application, registering a patient, and eventually activating, sending activation message, so on and so forth. You have seen this in more and more of user management systems that's out there. I was talking about the AWS Cognito. You could just perhaps look at a specific aspect in this context, maybe processing the patient application and validating their insurance details, or perhaps the only thing that you may want to customize and pretty much get away with actually releasing your user management system with respect to the patient onboarding straight off the bat, right? So you need to think about what serverless brings in to the world, in the sense that the productivity is a lot more. In fact, I put out a paper from IDC that talks about enhancing the productivity by 50% and projecting lowering the operational cost. Think about that combination for a CIO, right? So that is one of the reasons I want to actually touch upon this topic. So one thing I'm going to just call out, saying serverless rewards good design, right? So let's understand this a little bit. Let's understand the pricing model for serverless, right? Serverless, you do not pay for capacity. You are paying for utilization, and you are not paying for the idle time, right? Traditionally, when we designed services in the past, we always built for them to be independent, very loosely coupled, but eventually couple them in the deployment. Because why? We were constrained by the fact that we had limited resources. I have a X number of hardware in my data center, so I got to optimize for the capacity as against having to think about loosely coupled systems deployed all over the place. So deployment architecture favored putting things together, right? Now, in serverless, you are actually paying for utilization. You're paying for the number of requests. So that does not mean you don't have to think about the architecture constraint that you had for the last 60 odd years, right? So how do I start developing differently? Lower operational cost. What I mean by that here is, let's take an example of the same patient management system. Let's assume a CT scan image processing functionality alongside X-ray image printing functionality, okay? They have very different requirements. They have very different CPU memory requirements. But if you were to be able to put them together, and when you're deploying them, think about redundancy, failover, and all that, you are actually replicating resources that you really may not actually use. When you switch them into the serverless world and you look at them as different functions, now you are able to attribute the necessary resources that you want to allocate and just deploy them that way, right? The second thing, obviously, is attributing cost. Today, you are paying for utilization, and you can track the cost per serverless function that you are actually spending. Now, imagine you are able to connect that with the actual benefit that you are giving to the customer and able to compare the ROI. If something is not making money, maybe time to kill it. Something is really making money, go for it. I mean, right? So thinking about lowering your operational costs, looking at your cost attribution as some of the key things. The last thing, I'm not going to say much, we all have faced it, minimizing blast radius. By building systems in a fine-grained manner, you are able to minimize your blast radius when things go wrong, and hopefully able to quickly change and come back into production. The difference that I want to talk about when we think about core in the context of DDD and serverless is, let's take an example, right? Let's assume an e-commerce product, right? And let's assume they are thinking of building a product search functionality, and they decided that they want to offer a very differentiated experience for their customers, right? I don't want people to be able to come in and look for their item and just get very, very frustrated of not being able to find it, right? So now they thought product search is their core. Now, when you look at it as an application or as a service, there are a whole bunch of things that falls within it. Things like NLP, category filtering, and I don't know, recommendations, similar products, complementing products, things like that. But if you are looking at functionality today, in the sense that things are so much commoditized in the world, right? Search is being offered by lots and lots of vendors out there in the cloud. Maybe you look at the differentiating aspect. For example, in this example, visual AI or personalized recommendations are perhaps the two key things that's differentiating them from their competitors. Then why would I go and build this monolith big product service and call that as my core? Remember the point about what Eric was making, in the sense that it should take less amount of time and it should be the most critical piece, and you want to be able to focus on that. So with serverless, you are able to look at things as tasks rather than basically building applications. In fact, in the DDD perspective, moving away from a single big core to many tiny kernels is how I would like to look at that. Maybe putting a bunch of tasks that's related together under a bounded context. But like everything else in the world, right, there is no free lunch. Remember Martin Fowler's first law of distribution: don't distribute objects. Really, what is he meant there was don't distribute aggregates when you look at it from a DDD perspective, right? Now, this is where things are going to get very tricky. Let me actually go with an example. So I tried to model a patient visit export or patient visit report functionality. Okay, let's assume you're building that. So what you see in the slide out there is boundaries drawn around patient bounded context and a physician bounded context and a patient visit bounded context. Now, imagine I want to be able to print out this report, right? It has to at least contain a patient name and a physician name who offered this whole service. Now, the way that we have designed aggregate, it's very well normalized, and the patient name information or physician information is not available as part of the same bounded context. Now, if you are doing this in serverless, what does it mean? This system needs to end up calling multiple other systems, multiple other functions to get the job done. What does this mean? Remember, serverless, you're paying for utilization. Means you are actually increasing chattiness. Increasing chattiness means more money spent, right? So now, how do I deal with this, right? How do we unbundle something that we designed, keeping in mind aggregates should be optimized and we should not distribute objects, things like that. How do I design this, right? Now, how do you design something that is well organized, at the same time not becoming a distributed monolith, right? So that's something that you got to think about. An approach to change that, I mean, I'll leave the decision to you, judgment to you as to whether this is a better aggregate design or not, but imagine patient name and physician name is part of the whole bounded context called patient visit, right? Agreed, there is going to be a lot of other challenges in terms of synchronizing the data of the patient information, physician information into this bounded context. But hey, from a cost commercial perspective, maybe this is a better design, right? Who is to say? So now the point I'm really trying to make is deployment cannot be an afterthought, right? Now, when you think about serverless, you got to think about what should my design look like? How am I going to deploy them? Now, what should that mean to my model that I start putting together? So unlike the traditional world, we are starting to think about serverless bringing in deployment defining or deployment influencing, informing your model and thereby the design. The other key difference that stood out for me is the protocol. For example, in the previous example that we saw, for the patient visit to be exported, printed, you got to have that information with you about the patient, right? So now, if you are talking about events coming between these functions, what do you structure in the event? What do you carry as state in the event becomes a big deal. Traditionally, when we built applications, we focused on the core. Keep all the ugliness to the corners, right? Or you can write a DTO, you can put an ACL or open host, done, right? I want to focus on the core. But when you look at serverless, the functions themselves are just straightforward functions, but the integration becomes the key, right? You talk about what do I need to be able to have to the other task for it to be able to perform in a very optimal fashion. So as Dick says, and I quote, design events complete enough to avoid chattiness, but still generic enough to allow decoupling. So that's going to be very, very tricky when we start building applications. So the other thing that I want to talk about is start thinking about domain events as pretty much your mini aggregates. Because why? Each of your function requires certain set of information to be able to process that particular functionality. Maybe your events are actually your aggregates, right? And as I said, carry enough state not to make it too coupled, and still to be able to get the commercial benefit that you really want to get out of serverless. And basically where I want to leave you with is the paradigm shift that we are seeing here, right? Between a traditional and the serverless world. Obviously, here design influence deployment influence model and design in the serverless context. The other one is design apps with a single core. Here, design tasks with many, many tiny kernels, right? This is another interesting thing. When we talked about aggregates and the consistency boundaries, in the conventional application, the objects live much, much longer than in the serverless world. We are talking 200 milliseconds. So the way you think about the consistency boundary and how aggregates get present across different functions actually changes, right? Because of their lifetime as well. And data transfer in the traditional sense is very synthetic. You just throw it in a JSON, XML, serialized out. Here, data transfer is going to be very key to your model, like we saw in that example. And again, traditional talks about focus on the core. In serverless, you got to focus on the boundaries. Yeah, that's pretty much it. Hopefully, I was able to leave you with some few teasing ideas, thinking around the serverless and designing applications with DDD. That's about my time. And thank you, and have a wonderful day at the conference.